What's up, guys? My name is Marcus Heskins, and thank you for joining me. As always, if you're finding this content useful, please go ahead, do me a favor, and hit that subscribe button. I appreciate your support. All right, so I wanted to pick up from where we left off in last week's video. In last week's video, we went over the basic workflow that I like to use when setting up a mix in Studio One. So I'm not going to repeat anything there. If you haven't checked it out, there will be a link in the description below or in an info card somewhere. That being said, there's a couple things that I wanted to kind of go a little bit further on in this particular area, and then also I want to take a look at building a mix template that can be used. So that's one of the comments that I got in the YouTube video was, hey, can you show us how you'd go about setting up a mix template? So let's do that. Now, first things first, this is something that I used to be very OCD about, and I don't do it too much anymore. But if you take a look at this track, for example, let's just zoom this into view. We have a lot of areas where there's blank space. Now, this doesn't bother me anymore, but there was a point that this did bother me quite a bit. So if we zoom into this section, we can use any of the editing tools. This could be the range tool, or for example, we could just hover and double click to make a cut, or we could use our blade tool and make a cut and then switch back to our arrow tool to get rid of these sections. So for example, I could say I don't need anything here. I just want to delete this, and I want to get rid of this because the idea is a lot of people don't want to have any wasted space. So you could go ahead and do this if this is something that you want to do within your workflow. If it helps break things up visually to get rid of the blank space, by all means, go ahead and do that. Another thing that we can do is we can select all the events, and as of 4.5, we have the ability to either time lock or edit lock. Now, if you have to do any further editing on this, I would just use the time lock option, and I would leave this unchecked. But the time lock option is really useful because it basically prevents you from accidentally moving any of these audio events. But in the case where we're only going to time lock them, if we need to do any editing, like for example, we need to add a little bit of a fade on here, and maybe I want to jump to the beginning of this section, and I could also add a fade in here. This is something we're still able to edit, but they're time locked. So that's one area I wanted to focus on. The other focus I wanted to take a quick moment to talk about a little bit further is the sweet spot of the fader. Now, if you're mixing in the box and you're using, the shift modifier, which allows us to basically have some fine resolution with your faders, it doesn't really matter where these faders are positioned. But if you're mixing on a controller, you'll note that there's a sweet spot when you hit that 0 dB mark where it's really nice to be able to mix, and it's really nice to be able to automate there with your fader somewhere around there, anywhere from like plus or minus 5. It's really, really easy to work with. If you have tracks like, for example, this bass track over here, this is set to minus 12. Now, if I was mixing in the box, not a huge deal. I can hold down my shift modifier. But one thing that I like to do is once everything's gain stage and it's hitting where I want it, which is our VU meter is hitting around the 0 mark, and this is based on a minus 18 scale, which gives us a ton of headroom. Then what we can do is we can bring in our input controls, and I could, for example, say to myself, okay, well, this is minus 12, this is minus 3, this is good, this is minus 6, this is minus 9. Let's say that I wanted to bring everything, I want to trim everything on my input controls, which are pre-fader. I could say like, okay, I want to take everything and let's go minus 6 on the input controls. And now I want to go plus 6 on all of these faders, which will essentially give me the exact same level hitting my mix bus. But now my faders are closer to what I would consider the sweet spot, but our gain staging hasn't changed. And once I'm happy with that, we'll close our input controls. Okay, so all that out of the way, let's talk about building a mix template. I'm going to switch sessions, and we will go to building a mix template here. Here's a blank session with 3 audio tracks. I'm going to be completely honest with you. When I was in Pro Tools, I built mix templates for everything. And sometimes I would spend more time building templates than it would have taken me to just do it from scratch, even doing things manually in Pro Tools and setting up all the routing. In Studio One, it's very, very easy. If I want a reverb, I just say to myself, okay, I'd love the Valhalla on this. Boom. I drag it in, and it's created my send, and it's created my effects return, and it's automatically given it the name of the plugin. Only thing I would have to do at that point would be to, for example, change the color of my effects return. So for this reason, if I'm doing simple mixing, quite often I won't turn to a mix template. The actual mix template that I do have, it's pretty complex. And the reason that it's complex is not necessarily because it's hard for me to drag in effects returns and it's hard for me to create reverbs and delays, but I've got folders set up, I've got routing, I've got buses named, I've got my folder structure set up in terms of allowing me to print things. In some cases, I have some sidechain sends that are set up. I've got my mix bus processing. I've got all my processing on all of these groups. And it's all kind of preset to a way that is a really, really great starting point for when I'm working with a complex mix that requires me to deliver stems. So for that reason, I don't generally build a mix template for basic stereo mixes. I find that it's pretty easy to do in Studio One. But the argument could be made that if you have simple things like, okay, maybe I want a plate reverb, or maybe I want a delay or something like that, this is something that you could do within Studio One. So again, we can just drag this into any area in the console. This will add an effects channel. So this is one way I could do it. But since this is an actual delay, I might want to use, instead of an effects channel, I might want to use a bus. So if I drag this in and hold Alt or Option, then instead of an effects channel, you see it changes to bus channel. What the bus channel allows me to do is it allows me to create a send that can go to another effects return. So in this case, I could now create a send that would go, for example, to my Valhalla vintage verb if I wanted to do so. All right, next thing, let's just grab in a couple different things. I love the exponential audio stuff. I really like the R4, so maybe I can drag that in. Excalibur is really cool for giving me lots of various different effects, so we'll drag that in. And maybe we'll turn to some other stuff. I've got a Sonox plugins over here. I really like their reverb. It's really awesome for designing early reflections in small spaces. So maybe I just might want to change this to, like, let's say Sonox verb, which will give me an indication as to exactly what it is. And it's really about whatever you want to do in terms of setting things up exactly how you want. Maybe I want to grab in a couple instances of Echo Boy. So in this case, let's go to our Sound Toys folder, and I want to grab Echo Boy. It's one of my favorites. I'll drag this into place. And then from here, you could, for example, choose a specific preset. So if you had something loaded, either created in Studio One, or maybe there's some presets over here, I could choose any one of these presets that I want. So I could go to my vocal section and say, okay, well, here's a classic tape or analog vocal slapper. And I could drag another instance of, let's do microshift. Microshift is really cool for adding a little bit of stereo width. I could choose a style. The mix will set to 100% wet. We'll leave everything else set as is. So I'm setting some basic effects returns, which will help me in terms of getting my sound sculpted to the way that I want to. Another one that's really good, this is a tip I picked up from watching an Andrew Shep's tutorial on PureMix. Instead of adding excessive amounts of top end, for example, on using an EQ, you could do this with an oral exciter. Again, you want to go to a preset. You want to load something that works in terms of getting this, in terms of getting the actual tone that you want. So I could go to female brighter here, something like that. Now, once these are all set up and in place, I simply give these a color. One thing that I like to do, because I'm pretty OCD about the way my color coding works, is I like to set up some basic colors in terms of the actual automation tracks that are existing in my arrange window, and these are all linked to all of these bus channels. So now this pops out quite a bit to me. I can see all these as effects returns. I used to use a really, really bright neon green. Now I'm just using a kind of duller green, and the automation lines match up. So at this point, we will simply save this. Now, if I hop back over to my other session, which is, which one is it here? Mixing workflow. From this point, this is my starting point of my mix. Now I can go to song and I can import song data, and I've already added this folder, so it's nice and easy for us to find, building a mix template. Now you can see that all of the tracks that we added in our other session, they are available for me, and I can just swipe down and I can bring in all of these effects returns. Now, one thing I want to point out though really quickly is that when you're using the import song data feature, you really want to make sure that you have the automatically create automation tracks for channels option enabled, at least at the very minimum in your mix template. Even if you don't like seeing them in your arrange window, you can pack them into a folder later. But if you want them to show up when you're using import song data, because import song data works by the tracks that are in the arrange window, you want to make sure that this preference over here is enabled. And then, like I said, the last step that we have to take is we will use our song import song data, and we'll just scroll to the song, and at which point we can just scroll down and say, I want to bring in all these effects returns, and we'll click OK. And now you can see that Studio One has brought in all of these effects returns, and they are now available for me to use. So for example, if I wanted to create anything, if I wanted to use like some reverb or something like that, I could come in here, just drag our sends up, and now I have all of these channels, and I could straight away go to Excalibur or R4, anything like that. If I wanted to add some width, I could add micro shift. Really, really useful to just kind of go to the actual plugins and the effects that you're using on a regular basis and just save it as a separate session. Now, the last thing I'll add about working with the mixing template is in this video, we're talking about building a song and then importing our elements from our mix template into the existing song. There is another approach you can take in which we could, for example, let me go to this song. I could save this as an actual template. And then if this is saved as a template and you were to start a new song, you would have the option to start it from a template versus to start it from a new song in terms of a new blank song. And then what would happen is the actual song template would load, and it would load just like this. And then you would import your files into the template as opposed to importing the template into your song. So just 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. In general, I tend to make a blank song and do some basic gain staging first. And then after I'm happy with that gain staging, at that point, I will actually build my song and import any effects returns from other songs into my existing song. But the other thing is, if you make it and you save it as a template, you can also import song data from any files that are a template. You just have to navigate to that where the templates are stored on your actual folder directory within your system. So that's building a mix template that can be used to import into your existing songs. Just set up anything that you want in terms of your preferred favorite effects, delays, reverbs, anything like that. Chorus, could be modulation, and then just use the import song data. The only thing you have to do is make sure that you've created automation tracks for those channels so that you have the ability to import those channels into your existing song. Anyways, that's all the time I have available for today. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider hitting that subscribe button. Any questions or comments, please leave them down below and I will do my absolute best to get back to you. And as always, we will catch you in the next video. Cheers.